If the machine of government is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say, break the law. And that was said by Henry David Thoreau. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here once again. My name is Maxwell Egan, and I will be your host for the next hour. Now, in regards to the breaking of the law, as I just mentioned in that quote by Henry David Thoreau, it would appear that sometimes in order to do what is just, what is true, what is right, and what is proper, one must indeed break the law. After all, as said by Martin Luther King Jr., we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. So sometimes we simply have to break the law. We have to understand that sometimes laws are not made by just people. In fact, sometimes criminals obtain power within government, and then we find that the laws are made by criminals. And indeed, we are seeing just this to a great extent in a great many places throughout the world today. In fact, most of the laws that have been put in place anywhere in modern times simply have the effect of disempowering the people. I don't see any laws that have been put in place in the last 10 years that actually serve the people or empower the people or seem to be in the best interests of the people. Most of them are simply unjust pieces of legislation designed to further control the masses. And call me finicky, but I believe that if a law does not have its basis in justice, then it is no law and it is entitled to no obedience. I mean, let's get real, folks. The entire legal and justice system has been designed to supposedly benefit humanity. So why is it that what we are seeing from this system appears to be the polar opposite? Now, all this talk of law and whether it's the right thing to break the law or uphold the law, and in what circumstances should you do either, is, of course, leading around to the topic which seems to be the flavour of the month, and that is the Wikileaks and Julian Assange affair. There's been a lot of talk on all fronts about what's going on here, whether the whole thing is a big CIA psyop, and people saying Assange is a disinformation person because he doesn't talk about Zionism and he condemns Iran, which are, of course, both interesting points. But ultimately, whether Assange is a plant, whether he's delivering information, or whether he's simply delivering the information that he's spoon-fed to deliver is all debatable points. But the thing to notice here, folks, is that whether you believe in Julian Assange, whether you believe he is a disinformation agent, whether you believe he is a hero, is of no real consequence. Because what is really on trial here, what the core issues are in this case, is freedom of speech and censorship. That's what's really on trial here. Whether people have the right to speak out. And people should absolutely have the right to speak out, because if the people don't speak out when they see an atrocity, then who keeps the governments in check? What prevents these governments from doing anything they want to do? We've had politicians like Sarah Palin, we've had all sorts of other people, journalists, people right across the board, people such as Bill O'Reilly, which of course isn't surprising, Rush Limbaugh, all sorts of people basically saying that Assange should be held up as a terrorist or tried for treason, or some people have even been calling for his assassination. And this is completely absurd, folks. These people are advocating freedom while on the other hand calling for the death or prosecution of someone who exposed an atrocity, calling it a breach of national security. I've said to you many times before on other shows, what is national security? We've been taught to believe that national security is security of government. But don't forget, folks, that the government is a government supposedly elected of the people, by the people, and for the people. The government is not the nation. The government is simply the government, the duly appointed representatives of the people, by the people. What makes up the nation of your country is the people of your country. So the security of the nation really is the security of the people of your country. So how can the nation ever be secure if the people that are elected are freed of all scrutiny and accountability for their actions and are given free rein and unlimited funding to operate outside of the law? National security means that these people need to be exposed when they commit crimes. And whether you believe in what Julian Assange has done or is doing or don't, as I said, is irrelevant. Because the truth is that every politician, Sarah Palin and the others, every journalist, Bill O'Reilly, anybody who has called for Assange to be jailed or tried or executed or tried under terrorism laws, anybody who has spoken out against what Wikileaks has done by exposing these crimes, whether they realise they are doing it or not, what they are doing is speaking out against everything that America stands for, is speaking out against the freedom of all people within the world. That's what these people are doing. And folks, in the case of politicians and reporters, I would say that in each one of these cases it's very likely that the person speaking out has a great deal to hide, and I would also suggest that each one of them very much seems to hate freedom, because what they are doing is they are supporting the implementation of a fascist state, where government is removed of all accountability for its actions, and people are simply not allowed to speak. And if they do speak out against some government atrocity, they are labelled as a criminal. That's what's really on trial in the whole Assange case. Whether you believe it's a CIA stunt, whatever you believe it is, it doesn't matter. It's simply another case of Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, problem, reaction, solution. And as I said, what this is about on the left hand is freedom of speech and censorship, and what it's about on the right hand is removing government of accountability. It will be used to stir up a huge outcry and calls of breaches of national security and the safety of the people, and it will be used to impose censorship, if the people of the world take the bait and allow it to happen. And that is why, no matter what your views on who Julian Assange is or what his motivations may have been or who he worked for, he must remain free. He must have the people of the world standing behind him in order that the people of the world retain freedom of speech. Because without freedom of speech, we have a government removed of all accountability. And this must never, ever be allowed to happen. Because were that to happen, then there would never be any security for any nation. Whatever his actions were, whatever his motivations were, whether he believed he was spreading information to support Israel, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What matters is to understand that he is simply the patsy. He's simply the figurehead. Because what this issue is about is freedom of speech and the removal of government accountability. I mean, the whole thing's ridiculous, folks. The very concept that they would prosecute someone who released information about a crime is absurd. I mean, isn't it about the people who committed the crime? What, so if someone witnesses a crime and then goes and reports it to the police, are we going to see the police arresting the witness from now on? Because that's essentially what's happening here. I mean, what about the people who committed the acts that were being reported? I mean, seriously, under these guidelines, if you were a security guard that worked for Walmart and you happened to find security footage which clearly showed someone committing a crime within the store, and then you took that footage to the police and reported it, then you are the one who should be arrested as the criminal. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, folks. It really is. Because if we don't have watchdogs on the government, then who keeps an eye on these people? Who keeps an eye on these crimes that happen? And obviously we don't have reliable watchdogs within the government because these crimes happen again and again and again and again. So just considering this fact alone, it becomes obvious that the watchdogs on the government must be, and always should be, the people. Therefore, it is imperative that those people within government, or within industry, or within the military, who have knowledge of a crime being carried out, and are honest people, and seek to leak that information to the public, it is imperative that they have channels to do so, and it is imperative that the people who leaked the information are protected, and the public acts upon this information and holds those people responsible for the crimes that have been leaked accountable for their actions. And that is national security. That is securing the nation. because it is making sure that people are safe, and it is making sure those criminals within government who carry out or who approve of these atrocities are held accountable. And this is the only way that real and legitimate government is ever maintained, folks. If we don't have the ability to do this, then we have a blatantly unaccountable dictatorship. And this is almost what America is now. America is almost lost with what's going on with the TSA, what's going on with all of this stuff. I mean, it's just blanketed right across America. America is virtually in the stage now of Nazi Germany in early 1939. But getting back to Wikileaks, there is also another aspect to this, and another very good reason why the powers that be would be seeking to shut Wikileaks down. And that is the forthcoming release that had been promised by Wikileaks of internal emails and dialogues from organisations such as the Bank of America. And when one takes into account that all of these governments and politicians and media figures, and most of them all work for these banking cartels anyway, I would suggest that the forthcoming release of this information concerning the Bank of America is also one of the main reasons why Wikileaks is being shut down now, before it has a chance to release this information. You might recall that for the last few weeks I've been concentrating pretty heavily on the financial system. And a few weeks ago I had a man called Rob Crombie on the show, and we were talking about a legal case that had been held within America called Where's the Note? Where it had been decided by a judge that if the bank does not hold the note for your mortgage, it cannot foreclose on your mortgage. And you might also recall that we saw, because of that court case, the introduction of a moratorium on mortgages. So folks, what if these WikiLeaks documents that are about to be released about the Bank of America show that this bank knew that it did not hold the note and that it had no legal right to foreclose on these people's houses? I mean, if this were to happen, this would cause one of the most massive lawsuits in all of history. We would never have seen anything like it. The thousands of families who had their homes stolen from them, literally stolen from them by the banks, when the banks had no right to do so because they did not hold the note and they knew that they did not hold the note. This would be absolutely devastating, and this is probably a lot of why WikiLeaks was shut down now. And again, problem, reaction, solution. We have a problem. We need to react and provide the solution, which is to shut down WikiLeaks to prevent this information from ever being released. We can create a media outcry and have the entire situation fall under the cover of national security, and via that we can then implement the solution to the other problem, which is to introduce censorship, ban freedom of speech, and remove government of all accountability. So, even if Julian Assange is a plant, as many people say, even if he is COINTELPRO, as many people say, I mean, I don't know, folks, I'm on the fence with the whole thing. But even if he is COINTELPRO and was being fed just enough truthful information to make it interesting, and all the while steering attention away from things like Zionism and things like 9/11, even if this was his purpose, even if he was working for the bad guys, so to speak, now he's simply being used as a fall guy, and now he's being used to further the globalist agenda. And so by demonising him right now, and they have a history of doing this to their own people, by demonising him right at this particular point, they get to introduce censorship, they get to severely curtail freedom of speech, they get to remove the government of all accountability, and they also get to prevent the release of what is potentially the most damning indictment of the banking cartels that has ever been made public. And folks, the banking cartels are the ones who run the whole show. They are the ones who run any government that has a central bank. And they also either directly or indirectly control every person of significance below that in the food chain, people such as politicians and prominent media personalities. So when you take all of that into account, it becomes very obvious why all of these people would be speaking out in such loud condemnation of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.